Hi everyone, I am your teacher, Miss Hamilton. So today is your first video recorded lesson and it's review just so you can get into the groove of things of how I'll be running my lessons in class and also virtually. And when you are not in class with me, I will also post these lessons so that you can keep up to date with everything that is going on. Okay, so our first lesson today is grade 8 review, day 1, fractions. Okay, so before performing operations with fractions, okay, you must change any mixed, okay, and sorry, bear with me here because I am using my phone today before I get my iPad. Okay, a mixed fraction, okay, to an improper fraction when we get going. Okay, and we'll review how to do that as well. Okay. Something that's also important is that when you are working with fractions, okay, your final answer must be put into what we call the lowest terms. Okay, so don't forget to reduce your answer when answering in fractions, and that goes throughout the entire semester when we're working with fractions, okay? So the first one we're going to review how to multiply fractions, which is fairly easy. We can multiply the numerators and then we also multiply the denominators to get the final answer. Okay, let's start with a nice easy one, and then I'm going to show you some tricks as well, just in case you forgot. So example 1A, just going to zoom in here. So as we said, we multiply the numerators. So 2 times 4 is 8. Okay. And then we would multiply the denominators. 5 times 3 is 15. Okay. And now we look if we can reduce that. Is there anything common between 8 and 15? No, there's not. So therefore, we cannot reduce that answer. Okay. So that would be your final answer. And it's also in a normal fraction. So if this was what we call a improper fraction, you would have to change it to a mixed fraction for your answer as well. Let's go to question B here. Now, a little trick when you're working with fractions here, if you're looking, okay, at the opposites, you can actually reduce those down. So 4 and 16, okay, have a common value of 4 here. So we can go 1 and 4 if we reduce both sides by 4. And then 9 and 3 have a common number of 3. So we could have 1 and 3. Now, this will make your life easier in the end because you don't have to reduce as far. So for example, now we have 1 times 1, which is 1. And 3 times 4, which is 12. And as you can tell, that is the lowest answer possible for that question. So we wouldn't have to reduce that because we did the previous work here. Okay. Let's look at one more question. Let's look at one more, okay, for when we multiply fractions. Okay. So now what you're going to notice is we have mixed fractions, okay? So what we have to do is we have to make them improper fractions to work. So to do that, we take our first value, 1 times 2, okay, plus the value of 1 on the top. So 1 times 2 plus 1 gives us 3 over 2. So that is our improper fraction. We would do the same for our other mixed fraction. We would go 2 times 5 is 10. 10 plus 2 is 12. And keeping the denominator the same. Okay. Now also what I would do here is I would look for anything that's common now. Well, 2 and 12, okay, have a common value of 2 here, so we can make this 1 and 6. Okay. So now when we multiply, 3 times 6 is 18. okay? And 1 times 5 is 5. Now here's a little situation where you have to go that extra step. Even though it might be reduced in its lowest terms, you have to put that into a mixed fraction. So you do 18 divided by 5, which can go in approximately 3 times. And you would have 3 over 5 left. So that would be your final answer. That would be the answer that I'm looking for, okay? This would get you almost full marks, but this gets you full marks, okay? Okay, so we're going to move away from multiplication. I'm just going to zoom out here. And we're going to move into what happens when we divide with fractions. So again, I've given you a kind of a list to follow that might help you. Change the division to multiplication and flip the second fraction. Multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. So it's very much like multiplication, except that there's one more step that has to be done, which is flipping of that second fraction. So let's look at our first example. Okay, we have 3 over 5 divided by 6 over 7. So again, we need to flip that second fraction. So 7 over 6. Okay, and now we change the division sign to multiplication, and we can straight multiply here. Okay. Oh, and if you want to make it easier, again, we can look at 3 and 6. Okay, common value of 3. So this would become 1. This would become 2. So you'd have 1 times 7 is 7. And you would have 5 times 2 is 10, giving us our lowest answer. Now again, if you did 3 times 7, 5 times 6, you could reduce at the end. So you wouldn't lose marks there as long as you come up with the right answer at the end, okay, if you choose to do it that way. This way is just a little bit simpler, that's all. Now let's look at a little bit harder of a question. So we have some mixed fractions here. So in this one, the first thing that you have to do is you have to get rid of the mixed fractions. So 2 times 3 is 6. 6 plus 2 is 8 over 3. And I'm going to still leave it as division. I'm not going to flip it yet, just to not confuse you. Okay, you'd have 1 times 5 is 5. 5 plus 1 is 6 over 5. Okay. And now what we're going to do is now we're going to flip the second fraction. So we'd have 8 over 3 times 5 over 6. Okay. And then again, now I would look, okay, so is there anything that has anything common? Yeah. 8 and 6, they both could be divided by 2. So you'd have 3 and 4. So if we start at the top, 4 times 5 is 20. 3 times 3 is 9, okay? So even though that's lowest terms, it's not the final answer because now we need to make it improper. So you go 20 divided by 9, which approximately can go in 2 times, but leaves you with a remainder of 2 over 9. Okay, so that ends the little part of multiplying and dividing fractions. Now we're going to move on to adding and subtracting fractions. More students actually struggle with this part of working with fractions because I guess it requires a little bit more extra steps. So to add or subtract fractions, you must A, find the common denominator, B, convert the fractions to the common denominator. So you must have a common denominator before you can do any subtraction or adding of the numerator, okay? And you keep the denominator the same. So we're going to look at 4 examples, and then this lesson will be actually done. So let's look at the first example, okay? 1/2 plus 5 over 6, okay? So what we need to do is we need to convert the denominators to be a common number. And again, this is a skill, you should know your multiplications fairly well. We know 2 can go into 6, okay? And how many times can go into 6? It can go into 6 to 3 times. So what we would end up doing is actually multiplying this fraction, okay, by 3, okay? So we end up multiplying the top, so 3 times 1 is 3, okay? And 2 times 3 is 6. And now what we have here, okay, so just rewriting this out, is 3 plus 5 over 6. So as we said, we add the numerators, so we get 8, okay, over, and we keep the denominator 6. Now, again, the problem here is we have to either reduce it and then make it a mixed fraction. So what we'll notice is 8 and 6 have a common value of 2 in it, so we could divide both by 2. So I'm just going to put a little arrow like that. We divide both by 2. So we would end up getting 4 over 3. But again, you're not quite done because I've asked for you to not make sure that you put them into mixed fractions if they're improper. So 4 divided by 3 can go in one time, leaving 1/3 left. So that would be your final answer. That would get you 100%. Now, when you're working with fractions like this, they're not always going to be that easy where it's just one fraction that has to be converted. Okay, so let's take a look at question B here. So 5 over 7 plus 2 over 3. Obviously, one fraction can't be changed to go into the other because 5 can't go into 2 and 7 can't go into 3, or vice versa. So what you have to do is you have to find a common denominator. So one of the simplest way to find the common denominator is just to quickly multiply the denominators. So right away, 7 times 3, 21. So 21 would be your common. Now, that's a quick, easy way. Doesn't mean it's always the fastest way because there could be a lower common denominator that they would have. But that's just a little trick if you ever get stuck. Okay, so we know there's a common denominator of 7, 3. So what we can do is we can multiply this whole fraction by 3, and we'll multiply this whole fraction by 7. Okay, so we would end up getting 15 over 21 plus 14 over 21. So now that we have common denominators, we can add the numerators up. So 15 plus 14 gives us 29 over 21. Now, though that fraction there can't be reduced, okay, there's nothing common between 29 and 21. So what we do is we place it into a mixed fraction. So 29 can go into 21 one time, and would give us a remainder of 8 over 21. And so that would be your final answer here. So let's practice another question like that, but let's look at some subtraction examples. How about that? Again, it doesn't really change how you approach the question. It just changes how you approach the numerators in the end. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom in on question C here. So 4 over 9, subtract 1 over 5. Okay, so if you want to do this quickly, you could go 9 times 5 gives us a common denominator of 45. So we would multiply everything in this fraction by 5. Okay, you can multiply everything in this fraction by 9. Okay, and then we can put that down. Okay, so we end up with our new fractions of 20 over 45. Subtract 9 over 45. And it should always be a good guess away that if your denominators are the same, now you can move forward in the step. So 20 subtract 9 gives us 11, and 45 stays the same because the denominators do not subtract, they just stay the same. And we are looking at our final answer here. And we've made it to the last question of this lesson, okay? So what you'll notice about the last question of this lesson is that it's a mixed fractions, and then they also have subtraction with them. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to convert the mixed fractions into improper fractions. So 2 times 4 is 8. 8 plus 1 is 9 over 4. Okay. Subtract. Okay. Then we do the second fraction. 1 times 6 is 6. 6 plus 5, okay, is 11 over 6. So now what you have to do is you have to find the common denominator. So here's one of those things where if you did 4 times 6, yeah, 24 is common, but I'm sure you can find a lower common denominator here. So for example, 4 and 6, the lower common denominator, which means you would do less reducing at the end, would be 12, okay? So then I can multiply everything, okay, in this fraction by 3, and I can multiply everything in this fraction by 2, okay? So that's just an example that I was talking about before of sometimes that little trick I showed you isn't always the best method. You can find a lower common denominator to work with. So 9 times 3 is 27, okay, over 12. And then let 20 get 22 over 12 as well, okay? And now we can do the math because, look, we have common denominators. So 27 minus 22 leaves us with 5 over 12. There's nothing common between 5 and 12, so you are left with 5 and 12 as your answer. Now, you're going to notice at the end of each of my lessons, I do provide the homework with the textbook or a worksheet. Because of our first week of online learning, I had only provided you with one worksheet instead of multiple, because just to make your life a little bit easier. So don't worry about this homework this week. That's to go with a different worksheet. You're just going to work through the worksheet that's at the end of the package. Okay, so you can either watch all the lessons and then work on that worksheet, or you can work on questions from that worksheet that are associated with each lesson. Okay. Now, if you have any questions, what I would ask is that you put them in the comments below or email me. I'm really good at answering emails. And if it's specific questions, take a picture of the question, okay? And typically what I'll do is I'll email you how to take that out. Or when we start into the course, what we'll be doing is we can do team meetings or Google Meets, and I can actually help you work through problems more as a tutor. Okay, guys, it was great to do your first video lesson, and I hope you enjoy.